Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are headed back to Endor for a discussion of Ewoks, the Battle of Endor. But before we join Wicket and Cindel on this adventure, Jay, where can we be found on social media?
All right. Well, we can be found very conveniently on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield's down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So again, we are talking about Ewoks, the Battle for Endor. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on this before we kind of get into our discussion. But this was released in 1985. It premiered on ABC on November 24th with a limited international release in 1986. It first appeared on home video in 1987, and then it was added to Disney Plus as part of the Vintage Collection in 2021. That was due to fan pressure. Lucasfilm originally had no plans for that, but enough people asked for it, so that's what they did. It was written and directed by Jim and Ken Wheat, based on a story by George Lucas. He had just watched Heidi with his daughter and had the idea of Cindel becoming an orphan and living with a hermit in the woods. Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, that's where we get this idea, and I can't wait to talk about that part with you. Like its predecessor, it was largely shot in Marin County, California. Some other notable creators that worked on this were Joe Johnston, who is a production designer and second unit director. He's probably most famously known for designing Boba Fett, and he was an art director for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And then Phil Tippett, the special effects guru, was a creature supervisor and stop motion supervisor. So we had some stop motion work in this movie that he was responsible for. So Jay, again, brief summary of this. It's set 6 months after Caravan of Courage. Cindel family are getting ready to leave Endor after they're done repairing their ship. And that just happens to be when the Sanyasin marauders attack. And Cindel's entire family gets killed during the raid.
Yeah.
Wicket and Cindel and the other Ewoks are captured and thrown into the back of a wagon from which they escape. And then they find refuge and some assistance from an old hermit named Noah. Eventually, a witch in service to Terak, who is the leader of the Marauders, comes and kidnaps Cindel in the belief that she can activate a component of a star cruiser, which they think is a magic item, and allow them to travel stars. Noah, Wicket, and Noah's sidekick Teak eventually rescue Cindel and the Ewoks, and the Marauders are defeated at Noah's starship when he gets the ship powered back up. So there you go. That's the summary of the movie right there. What did you think about this overall?
Well, Dennis, I have to say, the first movie was a lot more, I feel like lighthearted. There was a lot more levity involved, even though there were some, themes of suspense and whatnot. But gosh, this one really leans into a much darker territory. As you said, Cindel loses her entire family in the first 5 minutes, which I was shocked because I'd never seen this before. So I'm, again, just like Caravan of Courage, this was the first time I'd been introduced to these movies. And so that kind of surprised me. And, some of the, cheesy kinds of things aside, as far as the almost want to call the Marauders the Weequay wannabes in some ways. I hate to say it, and some of the special effects were a little rough, but I mean it's got some themes. I mean, you've got these themes of loss and survival, even revenge. Here's a quest that they go on it's really kind of full of tension and danger and very emotional core that goes along with it. And Cindel herself is proven to be quite the brave little soul.
Yeah, I guess I like this a whole lot better than Caravan of Courage. Not that I dislike that, but I felt like this was a much tighter story. It made a whole lot more sense. Yes, it was darker, but it did have more recognizable themes than the first movie did. And it felt more like Star Wars to me. It
Mhm.
felt more like a Star Wars adventure. And I think that's due to a couple things. One, George Lucas, I think, had more involvement in this. He wrote an initial story, and then he was involved not so much during the filming of the movie, but during the post production and the editing. He had a lot. His hand was in it a lot more than the previous movie. And just looking at Endor itself, that was one of the things I noticed when we were watching Caravan of Courage and talking about that a few weeks ago, was that you could tell they just took their camera out to the woods and looked over the hills and things like that. I felt like they did a better job making this look like the Endor we saw in Return of the Jedi overall. We didn't get Bright Tree Village, but we got more views inside the majestic forest. It also kind of reminded me of a little bit of Willow in its tone,
Mm.
and the adventure setting of the whole thing. But I thought this was. Is it a great movie? No. Is it fun? Yes. It is definitely darker, but I think it is a better constructed story overall.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there were some downsides for me too. I mean, it felt a little slow at times with the pacing, and some of the dialogue was, a bit tough to handle. But there's I mean, overall, I agree with you, and the relationship just between Cindel and Wicket was a lot more deep, obviously, this time around. And the only thing that didn't I mean, as far as setting goes, when they were in the marauders castle, that
Mhm.
just seemed really out of place to me, especially at the very towards the end when they were running away from it. It was more, rocks and, trampled grass and that type of thing until they finally did get back into the woods, but that part of it did not feel like Endor at all.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I agree with that. I think even though that's the case, still the castle, the appearance of the Ewoks, some of the statuary that they had up outside the castle looked alien, looked Star Wars and stuff like that, which is what helped ground it in Star Wars a little bit better for me.
Oh,
One
I
of the
do
things we
agree with
talked,
that, yeah.
one of the things we talked about with Caravan of Courage was, at that village, there was a ferret, there were hens, there was a rooster, there were
Right.
there was a goat, there was a horse. The only like earth animals we saw in this movie by comparison was a horse and a crow or a raven
Mhm,
of some sort. But I can forgive the raven because we've seen birds in Star Wars before, but it wasn't using quite so much earth imagery when it came down to their effects and the way that they chose to handle the story overall.
mhm.
Okay, right up front, this movie begins with a raid, and we see, um, you know, Sindel's father had been working on the ship, and then all of a sudden the village comes under attack, and we see Mace firing back at some of the marauders. His mother is lying unconscious, probably dead already, at his feet, and Mace yells at Sindel to run, and then he drags his mother into a hut, and then kind of from behind trees we see the marauders shoot at that hut and it blows up, and then her little bracelet that has lights for everyone in the family, all the lights go dark after her dad gets killed
Yeah.
a little bit later. I don't know about you, but it's like this kind of made Caravan of Courage seem pointless, killing the entire family right off the bat on this.
I know, I felt the same way too. I was like, "Wow, they went there right away." It
Uh-huh.
seemed like they could have at least, waited a little while into the story before diving into that. But I mean, I guess I understand why they did it in terms of that's sort of the backbone of this entire storyline. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as you said, since it was kind of taken from the idea of Heidi, I can see where where that definitely comes from, but no, I'm with you. I know I felt the same way, and as soon as I saw her dad in this one, I was like, "Wait, that's the principal from the Breakfast Club. That's
Yep.
I remember him." And what's crazy is now knowing that this is completely an aside, comment, but that this came out about the same time as that too, which is in my brain pan kind of, crazy, but anyways. But yes, I see where you're going with that. My point.
Right. And I remember as a kid watching this, and I was like, oh, that family's going to show up like captured by the marauders. And they're going to assemble on, they just had the bracelets removed or something like that, at the end of the movie. And then that never happened. And I still remember as a kid when this movie was, I was like, wait, they really killed her family over all
Mhm.
this. And look, it's a fantasy type of a story. And so, and Cindel is a main character in all of this. So she can't spend the whole thing crying, being depressed and everything like that. But I was like, she's taking this very well overall. I realize that they're essentially dealing with a 5-year-old actor on top of that. She was 4 when they shot Caravan of Courage, but she grew a lot between these two movies. Um,
Yeah, she did a
but
great job.
yeah, she was, I think, had is a child actor, and children that young only have so much range. But there was a noted improvement between the two movies for certain.
Mhm. For sure.
But it just was, I was like, wow, for a story George wanted to create for his daughter, I was like, that is really dark right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Killing off all, this kid's entire family like that. Um,
Which, I
but
mean, you think about it, I mean, that's kind of what Star Wars does. There's so many orphans. I mean, Luke lost his aunt and uncle. Rey was an orphan. I mean, essentially, Leia was orphaned when her entire planet was destroyed. So it's kind
yeah,
of
but those
not
are
the
all
first
PG,
time.
PG-13
Yeah.
movies. I mean, this is a made for television movie that's focusing at kids he made for his young daughter here. And that's the
Fair
difference
point.
to me. It's just yeah, okay. I mean, that's what that is. But this is more mature, I want to say, and that
Mhm. Oh,
it's
for sure.
in
Yeah.
tone and everything else is trying to do here. But as you're talking about here, there is this theme of grief and loss and mourning in here, and Wilford Brimley's character. We haven't mentioned that he's in this yet, which is blew me
Mhm.
away when I was watching this earlier. We'll get to that in just a second. But Cindel's talking to him about how she's sad and she misses her family, and then he does well, they're not really gone. He's asking her about what's the last thing your dad said to you, and what's something you remember about your mom that makes you happy. Didn't ask about Mace, but we'll put that aside for the moment. And she talks
Mhm.
about the song that her mother used to sing to her, and then Noah's point is that they're not really gone. They live right inside your heart, and every time you remember those things, they're with you. And I thought that was a fantastic message and fantastic advice. And I'm even thinking to the sequel trilogy when Luke tells Leia, no one's ever truly gone here, and
Aw, yeah.
so that message carries forward in Star Wars, and I like that quite a bit. But it really came at a price of having a very dark beginning to this movie.
Yeah, it really did.
hmm So let's talk about Wilford Brimley a little bit here. What do you make of him as our hero of the story?
Well, he's kind of a more bizarre Obi-Wan Kenobi in some ways. All
hmm
I could think of was the hero's journey. And so he's kind of that archetypical kind of wise hermit, kind of thing. But and he was very gruff at first. But I mean, with he and of course Teak, and you could tell that he didn't want to have anyone like, the old "get off my lawn" kind of thing. He reminded me a little bit of Luke even,
hmm
in Last Jedi. But, part of that was because he had his own little personal tragedy and he had his own loss, and so he was sort of, kind of protecting himself from that, and
Uh-huh.
so even though it wasn't really explored that much in depth as part of as far as his backstory goes, but he, over time became more involved, obviously, and his, guidance was very pivotal in helping to turn the tide on everything and eventually resolve what was going on and get off the planet.
Yeah, so he would have been about 50 years old when this was made. And I'm used to Wilford Brimley as, being the guy that was talking about what oatmeal or whatever he used to talk about in the commercials, and
Oh,
then later diabetes and stuff like that. Much,
yeah.
much, much older gentleman here. And so seeing him, comparatively speaking, he's you know deceased at this point, died in 2020, but just kind of getting him here in this hero's role, and then he throws down with the villain of the Terak, the leader of the Marauders, at the end of the movie, and gets the best of them out of it. I just was not used to seeing him. Now, it's very clear that they're using stunt doubles in parts because the guy that was a stunt double just didn't quite have the same build and didn't move the same way as Wilford Brimley did. But even then, just kind of watching him almost run through the forest at times, it's like,
Yeah.
wow, he can move. I'm just not used to that for this guy here. But
Train
the
him
thing
with
that, yeah, the thing that throws me the most is that if you go to Disney Plus and you go to play this movie, they have a little show image for it. And
Yeah.
there is someone that's in that is clearly supposed to be playing the Noah role that is not Wilford Brimley and has got to be at least 20 years younger.
I
I
wanted
s-
to ask you about that because that was like, okay, when I first saw that, I thought to myself, okay, he looks kind of like a Luke Skywalker type. And then I thought, well, is that supposed to be Mace? But then there was nothing.
Not Mace. And
Yeah.
to me, it looked a bit like Alden Ehrenreich, who played Han Solo in the Solo Star Wars story.
Oh,
But
there you go. Yeah.
I researched this for an hour and couldn't figure out what that was about. I found nothing but speculation from people on Reddit. This looks like it was some sort of piece of concept art that someone did before they actually cast that role.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there was a story and some sort of a script that was created for this. And then when the Wheat brothers, I assume they're brothers, came in, they didn't like it as much. And so George Lucas let them kind of recreate things. And so, and I guess it was probably also when he decided that they wanted to go with the old hermit idea in this. And
Yeah.
so this, whoever this is supposed to be, was not going to work in that role. But they created an entire another poster that's more reflective of this. So I don't know why they keep using this one because this guy's got nothing to do with anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was very confused about that as well. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you haven't noticed, go to Disney Plus, go to Star Wars, look up the vintage collection and look for Ewoks Battle of Endor. And you're going to see a character that is not in this movie on that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Wicket returns, played by Warwick Davis, and does a fantastic job. But that reminds me, the Ewoks looked a whole lot better in this compared to Caravan of Courage, in my opinion. They looked like they had costumes that were more akin to what they had in Return of the Jedi, as opposed to the floppy onesies they were wearing in the last movie.
Yeah, they were a little bit better. The eyes were still, left some to be desired, but at least the movement seemed a little bit more consistent to what we saw in Return of the Jedi. Although I will say there was, as you pointed out the last time we were watching Caravan of Courage and talking about it, a lot of basic / English being spoken by the
Mhm.
Ewoks, especially Wicket.
Yeah, yeah, and this is 6 months later, so clearly he's picked up more English from Cindel, and okay,
Mhm.
that makes sense, and it looks like some of it's gotten passed on to the other Ewoks. Some speculation out there is that most of the Ewoks were speaking Ewokese, but we were just hearing it in English so that we could understand what was going on, so we didn't have to have there's no narrator in this one like there was in Caravan of Courage to tell us what the Ewoks are thinking and doing.
Mhm.
So that's an interesting comparison. But we didn't also get one of the things I appreciate the most is we didn't get all that goofy mouth like not moving, but the tongue going in and out, and that
Yeah.
that was kind of creepy in Caravan of Courage by comparison. So
Yes.
uh, the leader of the Marauders is Terak, and he was played by, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, so I'm going to do my best. Carol Stroken, who is best known as playing Lurch in the Addams Family movies. He was also appeared in Men in Black, and he was in Star Trek: The Next Generation as Mr. Home, who was um, Texlana, Deanna Troy's mother's aide in Star Trek: The Next Generation. So you always see the 7-foot guy wandering around who doesn't ever talk. That's with her. So that's what he's for. He kind of has the same problem as the Ewoks, is that his mouth doesn't really move much when he talks, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain that has to do with the fact that it seems like quite a cumbersome big rubber mask that he's wearing
Mhm.
there. I mean, I think it looks really good, but um, there certainly is that issue with it.
Yeah, and I did not realize that that was the actor that played Lurch, but then, and other things, as you pointed out. But then
Mhm.
once I thought about it, I thought, oh, okay, yep, I could see that. I can totally see that.
Yeah, well, they need someone really tall, so there you go.
Right.
And then Charal, the witch, played by Sian Phillips, who previously appeared in the 1980s Dune movie, and Clash of the Titans, is what she was also known for, that, or at least what I'd seen. Okay, let's talk about her for a little bit. So she is this witch that works for Terak, and she's on Endor. When this movie was created, they didn't really specify where she was from or what she did, but retroactively, she's kind of been assigned to be a Nightsister from Dathomir on there, or an early concept of one. And I thought about this because she doesn't look like one, but
Mm-mm.
she's trying to use some sort of witchcraft. She has a magic ring that lets her turn into the Raven and all this. But it was Kevin Anderson writing the Illustrated Star Wars universe in 1997 that stated that she is a force sensitive witch from Dathomir on this. And I think if you were to create a night witch in the 1980s, that's exactly what she probably would have looked like.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, to see that, kind of retrospectively, I could see where they would totally fit that in,
Uh-huh.
and that she's got this kind of mysticism and reliance on illusion and deception and the whole ring thing. I thought it was kind of cool that most of her powers were presented kind of as this psychological warfare. She
Uh-huh.
tried to make, for example, Cindel believe she was this beautiful, woman that was dressed in all white, and she had this beautiful white horse. And so she's able to make her enemies basically doubt their senses. So I thought
Mhm.
that was kind of cool. And then turning into the crow and everything was kind of unique.
Yeah, yeah. I I thought it was a good addition to the movie here. It, on the one hand, see, this is one of the things that made me think of Willow here, because you had the Marauders, which could have been any number of different people from Willow that were the villains and stuff like that. But then you had this witch that was with them, and then there's a castle, as you pointed out there. So I felt, there was very much that vibe that was going on there, and I couldn't help but wonder if this movie did not influence the development of Willow when George Lucas was working on that as well. And
Mm-hmm.
but she's there. She kind of is a hanger on for these Marauders, is a bit. She's like under their protection, and the value that she brings to Terak is that she knows witchcraft. She should be able to get this component, and it's was part of they stole it from Cindel's family ship, but they believed from having captured Noah's friend that he crashed on this planet with, that this was the key to space travel. They just needed to figure out the
Mm-hmm.
magic of this thing. And so, after they've done the raid, she's sitting there like trying to utter magic words over this. And of course, nothing is working. And faced with being like exiled or executed, she basically said, well, that child's out there. I'm sure she knows the secret to this.
Yeah.
And that led to that great scene after she's captured Cindel, and Cindel can't do anything. They're both thrown into the dungeon, and Cindel just is like letting her have it, like, you're evil. It's just,
Yes.
kids don't hold back in all this. It's like, what are you talking about? This is a piece of starship. You have to plug it in somewhere. And and meanwhile, here, she is. Charles just like, no, don't be silly. Make it work this entire time.
And I love the fact that when they were getting out of there and they had the keys, and one of the Ewoks went over to try to unlock Cindel's cage, and then, or not Cindel's,
Charles.
Charles' cage, and then Cindel grabs the keys and she's like, "No, she's evil." And she just throws the keys and they go down into that hole.
Yeah, yeah, right into the sewer. So
Bye.
not letting
So
her
there's
out.
your revenge. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we get Teak in this one. This is this little
Yeah.
critter here. He's covered in furs, got long ears, kind of a simian looking face to him, and is apparently a native of Endor, but he kind of becomes Noah's sidekick. And at the end of the movie, when Noah and Cindel leave, he stays behind. And of course, we get to see one of these type of creatures in Skeleton Crew when they get to the pirate base there. So that's where this came from. I thought Teak was a lot of fun in this. I mean, he was endearing to kids back in the 80s, but he's not too cutesy there. And he does add kind of like a little bit of humor, and he's a subtle conscience for Noah at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that, because I had no idea who Teak was, and so when we watched Skeleton Crew and you had, mentioned the fact that, "Oh my gosh, this was in Battle for Endor, and we should really watch that," and now kind of going back and diving into the legacy of it was just a lot of fun, and so I feel like Teak in a lot of ways was kind of the almost like the droid companion, but not droid companion, you know what I
Sure.
mean? Because I mean, typically in Star Wars, that's what you have. And so just his fast reflexes and things. And I was really impressed with how well I guess I was obsessed with his hands, just how well they moved.
Yeah.
We had looked at all of the other characters and said, things are kind of clunky and chunky but it just seemed like he was a lot more believable as a character overall. And but yeah, he was surprising in some ways and also added a little bit of comic relief, but also had some warmth and some unexpected heroism too, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, because he meets Cindel and Wicket while they're wandering around the forest after they escape from the marauders, and he takes them back to Noah's house. And Cindel and Wicket, Teak doesn't talk other than a little kind of a chuckling yell that he does from time to time. But
Mhm.
you know, they think this house has been abandoned, so they're going to move in. They start cleaning up the place. Well, then Noah gets home and kicks them out, but it's not until after they had started making dinner, and so they'd made some biscuits and they had made porridge there, and
Yeah.
Noah goes to serve himself and Teak kind of pulls the little tray of biscuits over, and Noah says, "Well, you can have as many as you want, but don't let me catch you giving any of those beggars out there," knowing exactly that
Exactly.
that's what Teak was going to do. And so every time Noah's not looking, he starts shoving those biscuits into his bag, and then since he can run so fast, I mean, he's a blur when he runs. Noah takes great pains to say, "Well, I'm going to go get some porridge, and you stay right there." And of course,
Exactly.
he catches Teak running out to give food to Cindel and Wicket, and then of course Noah relents and goes out there when they try to make a fire. And it's like, you can't make a fire out in the fireplace, or out in the woods. You got to make a fire in the fireplace. And so he brings them inside, and it's like, "Oh, tomorrow you got to go." But it's just that one more day. You can stay around for one more day, and type of a
Mhm.
thing there. And so Teak was a good character. I liked him a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
in this. He was a
Yeah.
lot of fun. And to your point, um, I mean, probably the best realized alien in this entire thing. Um,
Yes, I agree.
compared to the Ewoks and the Marauders.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So some other scenes in this, Wicket and Cindel, as they're wandering around, find themselves lost in a cave, and they're oblivious to the fact that all these bones that are scattered all over the place
Right.
probably means this isn't a place that they shouldn't be hanging out. But they kind of camp there for the night, and Wicket starts making a glider, and he's looking for another bone to make another piece, and wakes up the dragon condor, which snatches Cindel and flies out of the cave. And so Wicket's got to get into his glider and rescue her. Um, this is what I appreciate about that scene. In Caravan of Courage, there were scenes kind of
Mhm.
just thrown in there that are pure puffery to make this movie something that was long enough to fit into a 2-hour TV block with all the commercials. And so there's just stuff that didn't make any sense. This scene probably doesn't contribute a whole lot to the overall story, but at least it makes sense in the scope
Right.
of the movie by comparison.
No, I totally agree, and then you understand exactly what the role of the little glider, serves in terms of, "Oh, yeah, we saw this in Caravan of Courage, and now Wicket is using his skills to make one so that they can escape."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But
Was there
Sindel
another
falling was, that was a
yeah,
little cringy, but
yeah, there was no way that Wicket was going to die fast enough in that
uh-uh.
glider to catch her, but again, kid story, so we can look
Right.
past that.
Right.
Uh, was there another scene in this movie you particularly enjoyed?
Oh, I mean, I just like the entire dynamic between Sindel and Wicket,
Uh-huh.
and I just think that the little actress that played Sindel just did an absolutely fantastic job. I
Aubrey
really,
Miller.
really do. Yeah,
Yeah.
and she was just so endearing and so sweet, and, like, I wanna know where she and Noah went from here.
Well, In Legends, she became a reporter.
Oh,
And I'm
really?
trying to remember which one of the books that she showed up in that she discovered some information. I think she kind of might have gotten duped into revealing some information that made the Jedi look bad. It may have been the Fate of the Jedi series. I can't remember for certain, but she did show up in very limited bits. And then I know there was a reference to this kind of as an in-universe type of a thing when Jason Solo went to check on his daughter. Apparently, she'd been watching some show about an orphan girl who made friends with Ewoks or something like that. So this had some references in the Legends, but yeah, I mean, because Noah crashed on this planet. This planet, I don't get it. I mean, like it's supposed to be remote, or this moon, but yet Cindel and her family crashed there. Noah and his buddy crashed there. How often does this happen? And it's funny that
Right.
it should happen that so close in time together that they can find each other on this planet.
This is true. Yeah. So apparently the forest moon of Endor isn't as large as we might think.
Yeah. I
So,
also like the scene where Cindel and Wicket follow Noah to his ship because he told them to like stay at home. It was like, hey, you can stay here, but that means you're gonna have to do some chores. And Cindel's like wants to know where he's been going, so she follows, and
mhm.
Wicket reluctantly follows along, and then they discover the ship, which Wicket thinks is a big bush. But then he hits that trap, and he gets hung upside down, and finally Noah gets him down, and they're kind of yelling at each other. And I love the little word that Lurdo that he uses. It's like that insult that he gives. That comes up a couple times in this.
Yeah,
And
it did.
what makes it great is just the way the Ewoks say it with their voices. I mean,
Yes.
because Lurdo in a human voice just doesn't work.
It's so true. Well, it's funny that you say that, oh, yeah, there's all these people that are crash landing on this planet. Kind of makes me wonder if that's what happened so that the Ewoks actually had human-sized clothing for Leia to wear
Oh
when they
yeah,
you know
good
what I
point.
mean? Because I kept
Good
thinking
point.
about that because I was thinking, "Okay, yeah, Cindel's somewhat dressed like a future Leia might have been dressed kinda thing," but this was after that, so it must have been, maybe they just kept some
No,
things for.
actually, Kevin Anderson retconned this to between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Oh,
So was
really?
that Cindel's mother's dress that they had?
Oh my gosh, maybe.
But it still doesn't make any sense because why couldn't Wicket talk to Leia? Um,
True. This is true.
so
Yeah, he should
I
have
mean, and
had
why was he so
the suit.
fearful of her? I mean, that was
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, this got relegated. There was I don't even remember what all the different levels of canon were out there when we had the expanded universe, but this was according to the Wikipedia page considered C level canon. And I mean, and then when the Disney bought Lucasfilm and they decided they were going to set aside the EU as Legends and stuff like that, this got relegated to Legends as well. So
Mhm.
it's not considered part of the overall continuity, which is fine because it just does not fit. It does. There's no place you can put it where it makes sense in this regard. Because if you put it after Return of the Jedi, then why were humans such a surprise to the Ewoks at Caravan of Courage? Um,
Yeah.
so it is what it is, and it should just be enjoyed in this case without worrying about that stuff too much. Um,
Well said.
final battle at Noah's starship was pretty cool. I like that as well. I thought
Yeah.
it did a good job capturing the spirit of the battle of Endor during Return of the Jedi with some of the things that the Ewoks did. They set up their various traps. They had their slings. They used Noah's little catapult to launch things at the marauders. It suffers from the same credibility issue that I think the Ewoks versus the Stormtroopers does, but hey, for a kids movie, it works.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree.
Some of the special effects, I think we've covered this, but I think is way better than the first one. From the blaster shots to the stop motion animation that's going on. We get the blurgs in this
Yeah.
episode, which of course we will see later in the Clone Wars and in the Mandalorian. But it was clearly stop motion animation, but it was pretty good for the time. when it was
Well,
made.
yeah, for 1985, especially for for a TV movie. I mean, they did their best, like you said, practical effects, stop motion, other techniques. I mean, at the time, some of that stuff was considered kind of groundbreaking, but it's still in stark contrast to what we get in the movies. I mean, the movies, you really appreciate just how innovative and ahead of their time they were when you
Yeah.
compare it to these. But I
Yeah.
mean, still gives you some memorable creatures and scenes.
Yeah, in the Saga movies, they had a bigger budget to deal
Oh,
with.
for sure.
And, apparently there was plans to make more of these Ewok movies, but they cost more than George wanted to spend on them. So he kind of
Mhm.
put an end to that. But they also used matte paintings again on the production of this movie. So that's cool. Yeah, I mean, that covers most of it did win an Emmy for outstanding special visual effects. Back in
Nice.
1985. It was also, or I guess that would have been 86, but it was also nominated for Outstanding Children's Program and Outstanding Sound Mixing for a miniseries or a special, for which it did not win. And don't ask me who did, because I don't know. But but still, I mean, it's funny because when we talked about doing Caravan of Courage, this is really the movie I was thinking of. Not that I got them
Ah,
confused, but it was how
mhm.
much I enjoyed Battle for Endor compared to Caravan of Courage. Battle for Endor is the one that I watched with my brothers when I was a kid a lot more. So, I mean, this was nostalgia heavy for me when I was watching it, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was charming. The parts of it were endearing. Is it great? No, but it did take me back. This is of a style for the 80s, and I think this is very representative of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've brought up, things like Flash Gordon of the
Mhm.
time, and those types of things. So I have to ask you, how does it hold up? You said it was charming and whatnot and brought back a lot of nostalgia, but seeing it again after all this time, do you still have the same kind of fuzzy feels, or is there new appreciation or just a different kind of a feeling, or what do you think?
Well, it's certainly different seeing as a 50-year-old compared to a 10 or 11-year-old at the time. And so, uh, does it hold up? I can't say that it really does in the sense that, there's a reason why it's not part of the current Star Wars continuity. I mean, it's been set aside as this vintage collection and stuff like that. It's definitely a fun watch. I won't go back to it as often as I do all the other Star Wars movies. I mean, I feel like I watch a Star Wars movie, go like 10 days without seeing one, because it's on TV or something like that. Or, I could put it on the background or whatever. This won't be in that rotation and stuff like that. But, again, I remember liking it a lot as a kid. And I wasn't disappointed. Let me say, I should say, I guess, when I watched it this time in preparing for this discussion. And I think I kind of was when I watched Caravan of Courage. But this was just a tighter story. I imagine if it was done today, how cool would the Blargs look? Oh, we know exactly how cool
Oh,
they would look. We
yeah.
saw in The Mandalorian. How good would that dragon condor be? We wouldn't
Oh, for
have
sure.
horses. There'd be some other creature other than horses in this movie. And we probably would get Bright Tree Village and a different type of a base for the Marauders. But that was all passable for a made for television movie back then.
Well,
They
mhm.
did not have the budget that they poured in Disney Plus productions.
Oh, of course. But,
You know,
I mean, for diehard Star Wars fans, especially like us, and for me that have never seen it before, I mean, it was surprisingly satisfying. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie.
yeah. Well, it made much more sense as a Star Wars movie compared to Caravan of Courage. So
I
I,
agree.
I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, to go check it out. It's fun. The Ewoks, I think, are a whole lot better in this than they were in the last one.
Mhm.
It's a tidy story. I mean, okay. I mean, it could be a little slow in pacing, as you suggested earlier, but there wasn't wasted scenes when it came to this. It kept moving
It
along,
did.
and we didn't have unnecessary magic sticks that they had to create an entire scene just so that
This
they
is
could
true.
use it for. And you know, the plot points made sense. So yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Plenty to
Well,
appreciate.
yeah, I think that'll do it then for our discussion of the Battle for Endor. We hope you've all enjoyed it, and I will try and remember to put a link in the notes to our discussion of Caravan of Courage, so you can go check that out if you haven't done so already. But if you've enjoyed Podcast Stardust and these type of discussions, then we invite you to subscribe to the show if you haven't done so already. And once you've done that, we'd love it if you'd go ahead and rate review the show wherever you do that. If your podcatcher supports that, Another great place would be Apple Podcasts. That's one of the best places that drives the algorithms and gets recommendations in front of people. If you want to check out our entire catalog of shows, the best place to do that is at retrozap.com. All 858 previous shows are there. This one will be there as well. And while you're there, you can find some other great shows that are on the network covering everything in geekdom, from Dune, Star Trek, you name it, Animaniacs, Marvel, DC. It's all over there right now. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are again and where else we can be found online?
My pleasure as always. We are conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out all of our Pinterest boards as well as our YouTube outlets. So we are on the traditional YouTube as well as on YouTube Music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, share those out, and please interact with us over there as well. And we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the Battle for Endor, and if you've seen it, and if you have any fuzzy warm memories of it as well. And you can also hit us up on our TeePublic store, where we have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of products. And if you do happen to get something, that does help to support the show. So if you'd like to check that out, the link to that is in our show notes.
Okay, Jay, I know you've been busy with cosplay. What's the latest?
Always busy with cosplay. So I am on Instagram at j.snipscosplay, and you can find me as 2 different versions of Hera, also Ahsoka, the 4th sister, sometimes Leia. I don't have the Ewok version, but I do have the Battle Endor version, as well as my original concept Mandalorian, and much, much more. So I've got Fan Expo Cleveland coming up very soon, and I'll have a lot more material coming up right after that one's over.
All right, upcoming on the show on Friday, we end the week with a look at some recent Star Wars news. And then on Monday, we begin the week with another episode of The Clone Wars. It'll be episode 3 from season 2. So make sure you subscribe and stick around for those. So with that, I'll just say thanks for listening to episode 859 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.